Splinter Cell was released on many platforms back in the day, and today the PC version is often considered the best to revisit. But here's the thing, is the PC version really the best? In my previous video, we took a deep dive into the lesser-known PS2 and GameCube versions made by Ubisoft Shanghai. But this time we're putting every major release side by side, Xbox, PS2, GameCube, PC, and even the PS3 HD version, to figure out which one holds up best today, and whether the PC version still deserves its reputation. Let's start with the original Xbox version, the one most people played back in the day, and the version Ubisoft Montreal developed as the main game. On real hardware, it runs at 640 by 480 locked to 30 FPS, and only supports a 4:3 aspect ratio. But when running on Zemu, you can crank up the rendering resolution for a much sharper image. Unfortunately, the frame rate is still locked at 30, and there's no widescreen or 60 FPS hack available. There are, however, a few issues. For one, the shadows look more pixelated than they did on the original hardware. That's because Zemu doesn't filter them properly, although they do scale up with resolution, so they're less distracting at higher settings. Another quirk, the aspect ratio is slightly off, making everything look just a bit too wide. And if you increase the resolution too much, some visual effects break. The bloom effect doesn't render correctly, as you can see here. And the water shader on the oil rig level also has problems on higher resolutions. Zemu also becomes really heavy to run at high resolutions, so you'll need a powerful PC to get smooth performance. One more issue worth noting, there's a rare bug where dialogue audio randomly stops working, and if that happens during certain moments, the emulator can actually crash. There were also a couple of exclusive DLC missions for this version, but good luck getting them now. They were distributed through Xbox Live back in the day, and I'm pretty sure you can't download them for this version anymore. So while the Xbox version still holds up in many ways, and Zemu gives you a clearer image than ever before, it's far from a perfect experience. Now let's take a look at the PlayStation 2 version, which in case you didn't know is actually a completely different game. This version was developed by Ubisoft Shanghai, not Montreal, and has major differences in visuals, gameplay, and even story. If you want the full breakdown, I covered all of that in my previous video, so be sure to check that out. On the technical side, the PS2 version ran at 640 by 480 on original hardware, locked to a 4:3 aspect ratio. But in PCSX2 you can push the resolution far beyond that, and the emulator even runs the game at 60 FPS right out of the box, which is a huge improvement. There's also a widescreen hack available that works perfectly, rendering gameplay in 16:9 while keeping FMVs in 4:3. It feels seamless and makes this version surprisingly modern looking when upscaled. But there are a few quirks. Because of how the game uses MIP mapping, distant textures on original hardware look extremely pixelated. Thankfully, PCSX2 lets you disable MIP mapping and force the highest resolution textures at all times, which makes a big difference in overall clarity. On the other hand, increasing the resolution emphasizes Z-fighting issues, where distant textures flicker slightly, and the higher you go, the more noticeable it gets. Post-processing effects like bloom and depth of field still work at high resolutions, but they look a bit more subtle than they originally did on PS2. Interestingly, this version also includes a couple of unique visual touches that aren't found in any other version. Not even the GameCube port, which was based on the same code. Night Vision has a different look with a distinct green tint, and Fire has a heat distortion effect that gives it a more dynamic look. So overall, while this version of the game is very different from the original Montreal release, PCSX2 does a great job running it. It's smooth, scalable, and surprisingly full-featured, especially with the widescreen support. Before we move on to the next version, YouTube Analytics tells me most people who watch my videos aren't subscribed. So if you've made it this far and you're enjoying the video, consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps a lot and makes sure you don't miss my next video. Now let's talk about the GameCube version running on Dolphin. This version is based on the same Ubisoft Shanghai build as the PlayStation 2, so the core game is essentially the same, with a few key differences. On original hardware, it ran at 640 by 480 and was locked to a 4:3 aspect ratio, just like the PS2 version. But in Dolphin, you can increase the rendering resolution and the game runs at 60 FPS without any extra configuration. Visually though, there are some notable differences from the PS2 port. The night vision effect, for example, is much closer to the Montreal version, meaning it looks more neutral and less green tinted than the PS2's distinctive filter. And the fire doesn't have the heat distortion effect that was unique to the PS2 release. Other effects also look a bit different here. Transparent visuals like smoke appear more opaque than on PS2. And the shading in certain areas, like the training mission, is noticeably altered. It's subtle, but it adds to the sense that this isn't quite a one-to-one port. There's also a downgrade during loading screens. The visual effect that plays there is simpler and less dynamic than what you see on PS2. When increasing the rendering resolution in Dolphin, you'll run into some familiar issues. The bloom effect becomes broken and doesn't render correctly, similar to what happens in Zima. Depth of field also becomes a lot less noticeable, especially at higher resolutions. Dolphin does include a widescreen hack, but it doesn't work especially well here. You'll get improper rendering at the edges of the screen, and the FMV cutscenes are stretched to 16:9 rather than being letterboxed, which doesn't look great. So while this version is still quite playable, it lacks some of the visual flair and polish of the PS2 version when running on PCSX2. The night vision looks more like the original Montreal game, but overall it feels like a slightly toned down port. Now let's take a look at the PC version, which unlike the PS2 and GameCube versions, was developed by Ubisoft Montreal just like the original Xbox release. On paper, it should be the definitive way to play the game. It's got mouse and keyboard support, high frame rates, and can run at any resolution. Just tweak a few settings in the INI file and you're good to go. But in practice, things are a bit messier. For starters, while the frame rate can go up to 200 FPS, anything above 60 breaks the NPC AI and physics. The real issue is that on modern PCs, it's practically impossible to cap the game at 60. VSync doesn't work, and even driver-level frame rate limits don't behave reliably. This makes the experience pretty unusable without mods. Shadows are another problem. The default buffer shadows, which should look identical to the Xbox version, are completely broken on modern GPUs, resulting in completely missing light, which can cause a lot of problems during gameplay. You can switch to projector shadows through a config tweak, but they're a noticeable downgrade. There's also no depth of field, and the bloom effect is heavily diminished. That said, the PC version does have one major advantage. You can still play the original downloadable missions, which were released for the Xbox but are now nearly impossible to access there. And even better, the community has stepped in to improve things. There's a mod called Enhanced SC, which is actively being developed to make this version the best possible way to play. It fixes the buffer shadows, adds a proper frame rate limit, tweaks UI elements, adds a checkpoint system like the Xbox version, and even restores a couple of cut levels, though keep in mind those levels currently have no working audio. The mod also introduces quality of life features like reworked controls, difficulty options, outfit hacks, and more. It's still a work in progress, and it doesn't fix everything. Bloom and depth of field are still missing, for example, but it's easily the best way to experience the PC version today. Now let's check out the PlayStation 3 version, which was part of the Splinter Cell Trilogy HD Collection. This is a port of the PC version, so we're back in Ubisoft Montreal territory, not the Shanghai version seen on PS2 and GameCube. Out of the box, the PS3 version runs at 720p and 60 FPS, with full 16:9 support, no hacks needed. And when you run it through RPCS 3, you can bump the resolution and add anisotropic filtering, which helps clean up the textures at oblique angles, something the original release barely touched. but it's not all smooth sailing. Just like on PC, depth of field is missing, and the bloom effect is toned down quite a bit. One odd issue with this version is the brightness. By default, it's cranked way too high, which makes the game look too bright. You'll want to lower it in the settings to get it closer to how the other versions look. Visually, it also introduces a new UI, which was redesigned specifically for this remaster. And, in my opinion, it looks uglier than the original. Ugly icons, simpler design, it feels more like a placeholder than a polished upgrade. As for the textures, they were supposedly upgraded for this version, but looking closely, they're basically the same resolution as the PC version. They just look different. It's more of a side grade than a true remaster in that department. And finally, increasing the resolution on RPCS 3 introduces a bug familiar to Zima users. The water shader in the oil rig mission breaks, causing odd visual artifacts. So while this version has some benefits, especially with RPCS 3's enhancements, it also carries over most of the issues from the PC version and adds a few new quirks of its own. Alright, so with all that covered, I think it's finally time for the conclusion. Wait! We almost forgot the most important comparison in this entire video. The one that truly determines the definitive way to play Splinter Cell. That's right. We're talking about Game Boy Advance versus N-Gage. Now this is where things get serious. Both of these versions are 2D side-scrolling platformers that somehow manage to tell the same story despite looking like they came from a completely different universe. The GBA version runs at a crisp 240 by 160, giving Sam Fisher all the screen space he needs to do his little crouch walk. Meanwhile, the N-Gage version is rocking a bold 176 by 208, which means the game is technically taller, but with way less room horizontally. It's like playing Splinter Cell through a mail slot. And it gets better. The frame rate is 30 FPS on GBA, but on N-Gage, a cinematic 25 FPS. That's right, baby. 5 fewer frames for that extra European flair. Also, Sam's fashion sense changes depending on the device. On GBA, he's rocking a green vest, presumably for stealth in lush environments, or because that's what the devs could palette swap in. On the N-Gage, it's a blue vest, perfect for blending in with your Nokia-themed surroundings. Color-wise, the GBA version on MGBA is brighter, almost too bright, and comes off looking a little washed out. Meanwhile, the N-Gage version on Ikie 2L1 has a darker, moodier tone, almost like it knows it's running on a doomed platform and has come to terms with it. And then there's the controls. MGBA has controller support, so you can actually enjoy the chaos from your couch. EKA 2L1 does not, which means you're stuck playing stealth platformer Sam Fisher on a keyboard, like some kind of sick challenge run. The real Splinter Cell keyboard ops. So yeah, between the frame rate, color grading, fashion choices, and aspect ratios, this is clearly the definitive face-off. And if you actually played either of these versions unironically, I salute you. So, after all that, is there a definitive version of Splinter Cell? Well, sort of. If you're looking to play the Montreal version, the original vision developed for Xbox and PC, there's no perfect option. The PC version modded with Enhanced SC comes very close. It fixes tons of issues, adds quality of life improvements, cut content, and even checkpoint saves. But it's still missing proper bloom and depth of field, so it's the best option available, but its presentation is not flawless. As for the Shanghai version, things are a lot simpler. PCSX2 handles it beautifully. You'll get higher resolutions, widescreen support, smooth 60 FPS, and all the unique visual quirks that makes this version stand out. Minor issues like texture flickering are easy to overlook, especially when compared to how well everything else runs. If you're curious about this alternate take on Splinter Cell, this is the way to play it. So in the end, it depends on which Splinter Cell you want to play. Montreal's original is best experienced on PC with mods, if you don't mind a few rough edges. But Shanghai's version? PCSX2 is the clear winner. And hey, if all else fails, there's always the N-Gage. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe for more. If you want to get in touch with me, follow me on X. Also, if you want me to cover any other games, leave a comment below or send me on X. And please consider supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.